Welcome to the third tutorial in the Advanced WordPress Development series. In this one we're going to take a look at transients, which is a great method for working with options in the database that you can add a timeout value to, making it very efficient for storing specific kind of data. For this lesson I've created my own 2015 theme, so it looks just the same as the actual one. All I've done is I've copied the theme as is, renamed the folder, and then I went into the style sheet file and just renamed it my 2015 just to create a perfect copy. And we'll be working mostly inside this theme, so go ahead and set that up for yourself right now. Before we tackle a real life project, let's go through what transients are. Very simply put, they're a way to store data with a timeout value. So for example, you could tell WordPress to store an option for a day or a few seconds or a few minutes, whatever you'd like. So let's see how that works. Normally we could echo a value here, like for example we could say echo get option set URL, and then you would see that show up. There we go. And this doesn't change because it's simply a value in the database. But what if you want something like, what if you're communicating with an API and you want your 5 latest tweets? That wouldn't really change, second by second, so you wouldn't need to grab it all the time. So in that case, it's a great idea to put all the responses or the whole response into a transient, which times out after 5 minutes. So let's see how something like that would work. Instead of echoing something directly, let's set up a transient. Let's name it test. Its value will be this is a test. And let's time it out in 10 seconds. And now we'll echo the value of the transient. Hold on, echo get transient test. Now we should see this as a test. There we go. And if I delete this line very quickly and come back, you should still see it. But if we wait around for that 10 seconds to expire, then once I reload it, it will be empty. There we go, see? So the transient keeps it there for 10 seconds and then deletes it. What you can also do is set it to something like way longer. Let's see, that should work. There we go. And now if I remove this line, it will just be there until that 10 million or however many seconds was passes. But you could also use delete transient test. There we go. Oh, it might be removed. No, there we go. Delete transient, and then it deletes it manually. Actually, this is mostly all there is to transients. The real life use cases involve a bit more juggling with values and writing some functions, but this is basically all you need to know to get started. Okay, let me very quickly run you through a real life example. So 2015 has this sidebar here, and it does probably add a few queries because we need to get recent posts and archives and so on. So and these wouldn't really change a whole lot. So what we can do is add them to a transient and then display that transient. That could be just a whole huge HTML string instead of always calculating it. So what are the steps required here? First of all, what we basically need to do is the following. This is just pseudocode. So we get the transient. If the transient exists, display it. If it doesn't exist, display it. If it doesn't exist, then generate it and then display it. So this is basically what we're going to do for all the examples. So let's start out by writing just some PHP. Here we go, no HTML. Sidebar equals get transient my 2015. I think it's a good idea to prefix these just to make sure they don't collide. 15 and sidebar. There we go. If empty sidebar, then we'll do something which is actually this thing here. And that's basically it, because then we echo the sidebar. So what this will do, we'll need to get the sidebar here. Then also, I forgot from the flow that we actually need to assign it to the transient as well. There we go. So basically at the end, once we've gotten the sidebar, what we'll do is set transient 2015 sidebar. We'll use the value of sidebar, and we'll give it something like week in seconds. That's a constant in WordPress, which gives you the value of a week in seconds. So all we need to do is basically get the sidebar here. And what I can do is I'll just wrap this in a function. I'll just say function I'll just say myTF get sidebar. There we go. There we go. And let's see if I need to modify anything here. I definitely do. So I think what I'll do is I'll use output buffering. This is probably not what I would do in real life, but for now it'll be fine. We generate this whole HTML, and then what we can do is, this should actually be PHP, there we go. So then we'll say sidebar, well actually we could just, sidebar equals, get clean, that will return the HTML, and then return the sidebar, there we go. So what should happen here is, hold on, I'll just use this function here. Alright, so what's going on here? First of all, we're going to get a transient named my2015 sidebar. This either has a value, in which case it's the HTML for the sidebar, or it doesn't. If it doesn't, then we'll go ahead and generate it using our function. So now sidebar actually does have the correct value anyway. Next, we set the transient to this sidebar value, which means that our transient will now have the same value as we need it to, and it will expire in a week. And then we simply echo our sidebar. So let's go back and take a look if that works. Yes, it works fine. There we go. All right, so let's see if that actually helped. So if I come back here and I just use this, it should always generate the sidebar for us. So let's take a look. That took, no, it's not working, is it? I probably should echo it, yeah. There we go. So it's taking 34 queries. If I remove this and use our own code, you can see the query monitor going on here, and it takes 31. So we've decreased our query needs by 3, which isn't bad considering that we have 34, so it's almost 10% less. And you can do it for other elements of your website, like your footer. If you have a big one, it obviously wouldn't make sense to do it for this. But if you have a large navigation footer or anything which doesn't really change, it might be a good idea. That said, there are a few things we can do to make this better. Right now, this will only change once, well, it will probably only change once this expires, so in a week. Always keep in mind that this is a maximum time, so it can expire before. Even if it does, it will still be, far better than actually making it reload on each page load. So let's see what the issues could be here. Let's say I publish a post. It won't show up in the recent posts only a week from now. So we need some way of fixing that. We already know how to delete a transient. What we really need is a way to find out when that transient should be deleted. A word of warning here. So in the case of this sidebar, for me it's obvious that I need to update this transient when a new post is published because I have some recent posts on here. But you don't really know what other people have in their sidebars. So if you're making something general purpose, it's not a great idea to use something like a transient for storing the sidebar to make it faster, because you'll just end up causing all sorts of problems. Using transients to speed up your website is a better idea if you're not really using huge elaborate caching systems and you have full control of everything that's happening. So, but I think the principle is solid, so let's take a look at how to do that. First, let's take a look that it's working as expected, which means that if I publish a new post, then that shouldn't show up on the sidebar because it's still being pulled in from the transient. Perfect. See, it's not showing up. So what we should do, let's just move this to the trash. There we go. And let's change it so that when I do publish something, it does work. So let's just work in here. Of course, this is not where you would do this, but Actually, let's go into the functions file just to make it a bit nicer. Let's add an action that hooks into publish post. Let's update the sidebar. Actually, that's not a very good function now. My 2015 update sidebar transient, just to make it super obvious. There we go. And basically, whenever anything is published, we don't really need the arguments, because whenever anything is published, we just delete the transient. So let's just go ahead and delete this. There we go. So what will happen here is when a public post is published, the transient will be deleted, so that when the sidebar loads, this will be empty, so it reloads the transient from this function. Let's see if that works. So there, let's just refresh it quickly. Oh look, I just ruined everything that I've done so far. Let's see why. Yes, I deleted the echo by mistake. There we go. So everything is fine. So let's publish a new post. New test post. Publish. And now the sidebar should be updated. Yeah, there we go. So this time it took more queries, but if I update it again, then it will take less again. So again, this is a great way to optimize things that you have full control over. Where the transient system shines is basically communicating with APIs. So let me give you a quick example of that. We're going to build a plugin that lists Star Wars movies, and we're going to use an API for that. So I've just created a quick plugin that does nothing at all. It just has the header stuff, and I'm going to go ahead and activate it. So let's go to plugins. And Star Wars movies, activate, there we go. So what this will do is it will just add a widget. So let's do the add a widget stuff first. Let's use object orientation as we're getting used to it now. So class SW movies, and we'll need a constructor. And that's basically it. We'll just new it up, new SW movies, there we go. Okay, so in here we're going to add a widget first. It involves a couple of steps. What we'll need to do is add an action. I'm just copy pasting a bit here just for brevity's sake. We'll need to initialize a widget. We're hooking the action to, we're hooking something to widgets in it, and we're hooking a function named init widgets within this class. So function init widget, and we need to register our widget in here. So register widget. And let's name it SW movies widget. Whoops. There we go. So what we should probably do is create a new file to contain that widget. So let's include SW movies widget.php. We'll create it right here. There we go. And within this file, we'll create the widget. So again, this is a new class because WordPress widgets are always classes. Widget, there we go, and it needs to extend the WP widget class. We haven't really talked about extending, but that's okay. It just means that we're going to inherit some of the functionality of WP widget, but we're not even going to need to take a look at why or how that works. So we need a couple of things in here. We need a constructor. We need a form, although we're not going to have a form for this one, although we could use a title. So let's actually do add the form, which will receive the instance. I'll explain what these are. We could have an update function, but we don't really need it. The update function basically tells WordPress that when you save a bit of data in the backend for the widget, like for example its title, you can do some transformations on it if you want, but in this case we won't really need it. What we'll need is the widget function, which actually contains the display of the widget, and that's it. So the constructor function will need, well, let me copy paste that because it will be easier. I'll copy paste the example from the article. There we go. All right. So widget details, let's make this SW movies widget. display Star Wars movies. There we go. So let's use the constructor here. There we go. And Star Wars movies. This parent construct thing, this is something that comes from the WP widget. What this means is that instead of using this constructor, go ahead and, well, not instead, but in addition to using this constructor, go into the parent class, which is WP widget, and run the constructor with these parameters. Again, not super important, just something you might want to be aware of. So for the form, let me copy paste again because that's a fair chunk of code. So we're going to make the title equal to the instance title, which is the title that we've saved to this widget. Or if it doesn't exist, it's going to be empty. Otherwise, we use the code that WordPress recommends for widget, for not titles, but for options for widgets. In the widget section, we're going to, let's see how to start this. Let's actually do the framework first. So we're going to need the before and after widget thing, which is defined in your theme most likely. It's what WordPress outputs before and after widgets. And then we also, if we have a title, we're going to want to display the before title stuff, the after title stuff, and then between those, the title itself. So look if that worked. And we go here. And nope. Also make sure the transient is off. I've actually gone to the theme and disabled it. So the transient is now not in the way. That means there is something wrong in the code. Yes, I forgot to add instance here. There we go. It still doesn't work. It's very funny. Instance, let's see if this is actually echoing anything out here. Yeah, so something's wrong with my title. I thought it would be the instance, but apparently it's not. So that's a bit weird. Let's try to dump this instance out here. Yeah, the title doesn't exist here. Oh yes, because this isn't the instance. I'm sorry. This is the args and this is instance. Okay, hopefully this will work and can explain better. Okay, there we go. So sorry about that. So widget takes two arguments. One is the args that come from the theme, which tells it what the before widget and after title and so on should be, and then the instance stuff. So there we go. Our widget is now working. We just need to populate it with movies. We're going to use the HTTP API in WordPress and the Swappy or Star Wars API. So we're going to grab Star Wars films using this public and free API using the WordPress HTTP API. So response equals WP remote get, and we're just going to do something like that. Well, actually, we can make this request and then data equals WP remote get, I think it's remote get body, and we need to the request. There we go. So let's see what happens if we print that out. Okay, something is not working. Call to undefined function. Okay, so it's not WP remote get body. Okay. Let's see. WordPress HTTP API. This is, by the way, how many programs work. We don't know everything, of course. So WP remote retrieve body. WP remote retrieve body. Does make more sense, I guess. There we go. So let's see if that works now. Perfect. All right, so this is a JSON encoded string, so we'll just use some JSON decoding. And what we basically need is the results, and we need the title, and it probably has a link somewhere. Let's actually take a look at this here. Maybe it will be easier to see. Episode ID. We can already create the, here we go, there's a URL. So what we need is basically the title and the URL from each result. So let's go ahead and instead of just retrieving the body, let's also JSON decode it. And we need to add true here to make it an array instead of an object. So now we're going to have this inside our object. So, but all we need is the result. So movies equals data results. Perfect. And then we'll loop through that. So for each movies as movie. Also, don't forget to add an if statement here, just in case there are no movies returned, so we don't start out with an error. There we go. So for if we have movies, we'll echo a UL, and we'll just close that on here. In fact, it might be a good idea to only show the whole widget as is if this is true. So in this case, what we'll do is we'll just put all this in here. So if there are no movies returned, we'll just not show the widget, which is fine. There we go. So within there, what we need is some list elements. So we'll echo, what we basically have is an li that contains a link. We'll need the title in here. I believe it's title, and then I think it's URL. Title and URL. Yes. So it's movie title and movie URL. There we go. Let's see if that works. Nice. So here we go. We have a nice little list of links. And now what's going on here is that anytime we reload, and indeed anytime anyone reloads, so if this is a high traffic site, that could be a considerable amount of GET requests. This whole thing goes through the REST API of Swappy all the time. It requests the data, and this won't really change. I think the next change will probably sometime, I think it's the end of this year or next year, when the new Star Wars movie comes out. So we don't really need to refresh this all the time. So this is just ripe for a transient. The thing I do just to make it super clear is remove all these echoes and just do one echo at the end. I tend to do this when I'm creating, when I know I'm going to make a transient, just because I know I'm going to need to save the data, so I won't be echoing it all the time. So there are a couple of ways you could do that. You could do an output buffering, which is what I'm going to do here, but you could just create a variable and start assigning strings to it. But what I'll actually do is I'll just use an ob start function and then say movies list equals clean. There, I probably also start out by saying movies list equals an empty string, and then at the end I would just echo that either way. So movies list, this would either be an empty string or it would contain the actual list. So now let's go ahead and convert this. So what we would say is, actually instead of movies list equals empty, what we would say is it equals to get transient. We could name it Star Wars movies, and Star Wars films is the name of the thing. So move and movies, there we go. And if this is empty, then we would need to generate everything. Oh, I don't need that echo actually. There we go. And finally, we echo it. So what we're doing here is getting it from the transient. If the transient doesn't exist, then we're generating the movies list again. And then we're echoing the movies list. And the final piece of the puzzle is if it was empty, then let's actually set the transient with the same value. So set transient SWF movies. We're using our movies list, and let's give it a timeout. I think it's safe to say that we can give it a timeout of a year in seconds, or just maybe months and seconds, because it may come out, in 11 months, and then you might miss a month. There we go. And if everything is correct, this should work now. There we go. And we can check that it's not making any requests by echoing something out here. So before we do anything, let's delete transient right quick. Okay. There we go. So we're making a request because we've deleted the transient. But if I do it again, it's not making a request. So this is actually just saved us tons and tons of bandwidth. Of course, depending on how popular our site is, but it already has, I've refreshed like 5 times since then, so it's just saved me and Swappy 5 GET requests. Now, to make this a bit nicer, it will probably make sense to extract some of these into different functions. Definitely abstract this part out into a separate function, just in case I need to use it elsewhere. So function retrieve movies from API. I'm just making it super clear. Again, this will be a matter of preference. You could extract this whole thing and just return the results, or you could return the data as is, or you could return the raw request as is. It depends on how you're going to use this. I will most definitely always use the results. So I think I'm just going to return them. So return, whoops. There we go, request data, that should be fine. All right, so I'm going to return movies. In fact, I can actually just omit this and just return this, there we go. Okay, so I've just substituted this with this, retrieve movies from API. There we go. Another reason this is great is that it opens me up to actually writing a proper widget where I could add parameters here. For example, I might want, films sometimes, but sometimes I might want characters. So I can just add that here as parameters and just build it into this retrieval function. And I don't need to rewrite my whole code all the time. So that's just one function I might separate, but you might also want to separate this part or anything that you feel would need to be reused. For now, I think this will be fine because it shows the basics of transients. Again, transients are great for optimizing your website. It can make it faster, but for optimizing parts like your sidebar header and so on, you will need full control of that header and you need to know exactly what's in it. What transients are really, really great for though is interacting with third-party APIs and basically caching data temporarily. All right, I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments.